At my husband's CEO ceremony, his secretary wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him in front of 500 employees. When I told her to step away from my husband, Daniel shoved me to the floor and shouted, "Know your place." His executive friends laughed. Everyone else looked away. I stood up, brushed the dust from my dress, and sent one message: "Dad, take the stage." Less than a minute later, the chairman walked to the microphone. Every director in the ballroom rose to their feet. My husband was still smiling when the chairman said, "There will be no CEO appointment tonight." Then he looked down at me. "Claire," he said, "the voting trust is waiting for your decision." Daniel's smile disappeared. He thought I was only the wife he had humiliated in public. He had no idea I controlled 62% of the company he was celebrating. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever watched someone demand that another person know their place without understanding the room they were standing in. My name is Claire Bennett, and I am 37 years old. For the past 14 years, I have worked as a corporate restructuring advisor. It is a quiet profession requiring patience, precision, and the ability to recognize when a company is being destroyed by the person claiming to lead it. My husband was the exact opposite. Daniel Hayes was 40 years old, charming, ambitious, and addicted to being seen as the most important person in any room. He could turn a quarterly meeting into a campaign rally. He could describe a modest contract as a historic victory. He could convince a nervous employee that missing payroll was a temporary accounting issue and convince a banker that the same problem was an opportunity for disciplined growth. Daniel did not simply want success. He wanted witnesses. He wanted applause, photographs, printed banners, and titles that appeared beneath his name before the work required to earn them had been completed. That was why the ballroom had been filled that night. Technically, the board had not yet confirmed him as chief executive of Meridian Dynamics. The appointment required a final vote after the ceremony. Daniel knew that. Everyone on the board knew it. But he had already ordered new business cards, moved his belongings into the corner office, and instructed public relations to describe the event as his CEO inauguration. He believed the vote was ceremonial because the company had spent years teaching him that confidence could move people faster than facts. I helped teach him that lesson. I met Daniel 15 years earlier at a distressed manufacturing plant outside Milwaukee. I was 22, fresh from graduate school, and working under a senior restructuring partner who believed new analysts should understand companies from the factory floor before seeing the executive conference room. Meridian Dynamics was not yet part of my family's holdings. It was a regional electronics supplier, losing money after 2 large customers moved production overseas. Daniel was a young operations manager at the plant. He wore rolled sleeves, knew every supervisor by name, and stayed on the floor long after executives returned to their hotels. The first time I saw him, he was helping a maintenance worker repair a conveyor sensor with a flashlight between his teeth. He looked up, saw my badge, and said, "If you are from the consulting team, tell them the machine did not fail. Management failed to order the part 6 months ago." I liked him immediately. Daniel understood people. He knew which shift leader could calm a frightened crew and which vice president would lie to protect a bonus. He resented executives who made decisions from clean offices without understanding the human cost. He also hated being underestimated. That part of him felt familiar. I had grown up as the daughter of Arthur Bennett, founder of Bennett Global Holdings, a private investment group that owned stakes in Industrial 9, logistics, and technology companies across 3 countries. People who knew my father treated me either as an heiress who had never worked or as a useful bridge to capital. I used my mother's surname professionally and never mentioned the family connection unless legally necessary. My mother, Elina Bennett, had raised me after my parents separated. She taught me to read balance sheets before I learned to drive, and warned that family wealth could distort every relationship if allowed to enter too early. Let people show you who they are before they know what doors your name can open, she said. When Daniel met me, he thought I was Claire Bennett, junior analyst from a modest consulting firm. That description was true. It was not complete. Our first project lasted 6 months. Daniel and I spent long days reviewing labor schedules, supplier terms, and production losses. We ate vending machine dinners after midnight and argued about whether saving the plant required closing one line. He fought every recommendation that affected workers. I admired his loyalty. He admired that I listened before making decisions. When the restructuring succeeded and the plant remained open, he invited me to dinner. I said yes. Daniel made romance feel like momentum. He brought coffee to my hotel before early meetings. He remembered details from conversations I had forgotten. He spoke about building companies that treated employees as partners rather than costs. He wanted to become an executive. But not, he claimed, for status. I want the authority to stop stupid decisions before they reach the people who pay for them. He told me. At 25, he believed power would reveal his values. I did not understand that power often reveals appetite. We married 3 years later in a small ceremony near Lake Michigan. My father attended as a private guest and respected my request not to discuss business. Daniel knew Arthur Bennett was a wealthy investor and knew he was my father. But he believed we were largely estranged after my parents' separation. That was partly true. My father and I loved each other, but we disagreed about almost everything. He wanted me to join Bennett Global. I wanted to build a career without being introduced through his surname. We did not speak for months at a time. Daniel saw those periods as proof that my family had little influence over our life. He told friends I came from money but had chosen simplicity. He liked that story because it allowed him to appear generous for marrying a woman whose family had failed to appreciate her. During the first years of our marriage, Daniel was attentive and restless. He moved from plant management into corporate operations. Then, strategic development. I traveled constantly for restructuring assignments. We compared notes at night and laughed about executives who mistook jargon for competence. He supported my work when it was smaller than his ambition. As I became more respected, he began introducing me as my wife, who does advisory work rather than naming the firms I had helped save. I noticed but did not confront him. Small erasures are easy to excuse when affection remains visible. Meridian Dynamics changed ownership twice during that period. A private equity firm acquired it, cut research spending, loaded it with debt, and prepared to sell divisions separately. Daniel rose quickly because he delivered short-term numbers. He closed plants he once promised to defend. He called the decisions painful but necessary. When I reminded him of the young manager who believed authority should protect workers, he said I was sentimental. You advise companies after they fail, he told me. I prevent failure. That sentence became his favorite way to distinguish us. 6 years before the CEO ceremony, Meridian came within weeks of bankruptcy. A product recall consumed cash. A major lender refused to extend credit. Suppliers demanded advance payment. The board prepared to file for protection and sell the remaining assets. Daniel was executive vice president of operations. He came home every night, pale and angry, insisting incompetent owners had destroyed the company he had built. He did not ask me for help. Pride would not allow it. Instead, he talked about 12,000 employees who would lose jobs and blamed me for remaining calm. You understand restructuring, he said. Why are you acting like this is just another client? Because it was not another client. It was the company tied to our marriage, the place where we met, and the source of Daniel's identity. I called my father. Arthur and I had not spoken for 4 months after arguing about a logistics acquisition. When he answered, I said, Meridian is going under. I know, he replied. Bennett Global had been watching the debt market. Can we save it? I asked. We can buy it. Daniel will never accept that. Daniel does not need to know. My father understood pride because he possessed enough for 3 generations. We designed a rescue through the Bennett Industrial Renewal Trust, an investment vehicle whose ownership was not publicly linked to me. The trust purchased Meridian's senior debt, provided emergency liquidity, and negotiated control in exchange for stabilizing the company. Bennett Global ultimately controlled 62% of the voting rights, but the shares were held through trustees and nominee entities. I became managing trustee because the investment was my request, and because I understood the company. Daniel believed a group of long-term industrial investors had recognized his leadership. He credited himself with persuading the board to reject bankruptcy. I let him. At the time, I thought I was protecting his dignity. I told myself the source of capital did not matter if employees kept their jobs. Daniel gave speeches about guiding Meridian through its darkest hour. He accepted an industry award for the turnaround. In private, he said my restructuring work had taught him enough to save the business. He never asked why the anonymous investors supported his plans, why lenders suddenly became patient, or why the board approved my recommendations when I was not formally retained. He saw favorable outcomes and assumed they reflected his talent. I should have told him then, not because he had a right to the trust, but because secrecy allowed gratitude to become entitlement. Every year that passed made the truth harder to reveal. My father wanted me to join Meridian's board. I refused. I said Daniel needed space to lead without believing. His wife supervised him. Arthur called that misplaced loyalty. A man who needs ignorance in order to feel respected does not respect you. He said. I accused him of judging a marriage he did not understand. He replied, I understand balance sheets. Marriages are only harder because people hide liabilities. I did not speak to him for 6 weeks. Daniel continued rising. Chief Operating Officer, President, Acting Chief Executive after the previous CEO retired unexpectedly. Each promotion made him less curious about how he had arrived and more convinced that the company owed him permanent authority. He surrounded himself with people who praised certainty. Experienced managers who challenged projections were moved aside. Younger executives who repeated his language advanced quickly. Vanessa Cole entered his office 3 years before the ceremony as a senior executive assistant. She was 31. Elegant, efficient, and skilled at making ambition look like loyalty. She controlled Daniel's calendar, filtered access, drafted correspondence, and remembered every preference. Within 6 months, she knew which board members feared conflict, which vendors could be pressured, and which employees had complained about Daniel's behavior. She also knew how to make herself visible beside him in photographs. At first, I liked her. She was organized and polite. When Daniel forgot our anniversary dinner, Vanessa called to apologize on his behalf and sent flowers charged to the company. I should have understood the message hidden inside that gesture. She knew our marriage schedule better than he did, and she had access to pay for the repair. The affair began, according to later records. During a supplier conference in Vancouver, Daniel extended the trip by 2 days and told me weather had delayed meetings. Vanessa submitted hotel expenses under vendor negotiations. The following month, they traveled to New York, then Dallas, then Paris for what Daniel called an investor roadshow. Their rooms were always booked separately and upgraded later. Gifts appeared inside consulting invoices. A bracelet became client recognition. A weekend in Napa became leadership strategy. Daniel did not hide the affair brilliantly. He hid it inside systems people were trained not to question, because challenging the acting CEO felt dangerous. I noticed changes before I had evidence. He stopped leaving his phone on the kitchen counter. He bought new suits without asking my opinion. He began describing Vanessa as indispensable. When I suggested he promote her formally if her responsibilities had expanded, he became defensive. "Not every competent woman needs your sponsorship," he said. The accusation was strange enough to stay with me. I had not criticized her. I had recognized her work. Daniel heard threat, where I offered fairness. His contempt for me also became more public. At dinners, he joked that consultants like me charged companies to explain problems employees had already identified. He called my work theoretical. He told friends I preferred spreadsheets because real leadership required charisma. I responded lightly because I did not want to become the wife correcting her husband at every table. Silence became another service I provided. Then Meridian's numbers began to look wrong. The company reported a 12% increase in enterprise contracts during a quarter when its industry had declined. Deferred revenue moved sharply without explanation. Customer acquisition costs fell while travel expenses doubled. 3 new consulting firms received nearly $9 million across 18 months. But none appeared in procurement reviews. Daniel presented the numbers to the board as evidence that Meridian needed bold leadership. He also requested a compensation package tied to the same growth because the Bennett Trust controlled the majority vote. The board sent the materials to me. Daniel did not know that every confidential package prepared for the controlling shareholder arrived on my secure portal. I opened the report at my home office while he was downstairs, telling a television interviewer that Meridian's transformation reflected discipline, speed, and personal accountability. 2 invoices caught my attention. Both came from firms with generic names and expensive addresses. One provided strategic market activation for $600,000. The other billed $480,000 for executive stakeholder alignment. The descriptions said nothing. The payment approvals came from Daniel's office. Vanessa was listed as the administrative contact. I asked the Trust's audit counsel to conduct a discrete vendor review. We did not accuse anyone. We compared registrations, beneficial owners, bank routing data, deliverables, and employee records. One company belonged to Vanessa's older brother, who operated a small event business. Another belonged to a former college roommate. The third was registered to a lawyer who had formed dozens of shell entities. None had staff capable of delivering the services billed. Payments moved from Meridian to the companies, then into accounts used for luxury travel, designer purchases, and a condominium Vanessa had recently leased. Daniel's name appeared on no account. His fingerprints appeared everywhere else. The same week, a woman named Maya Ortiz contacted my consulting office. She was a senior financial analyst at Meridian and did not know my connection to the voting trust. She asked for a confidential meeting about a leadership ethics matter. We met at a quiet cafe across town. Maya arrived carrying no documents and looked over her shoulder twice before sitting. She told me Daniel's team had pressured finance to recognize revenue from contracts not yet finalized. One agreement depended on regulatory approval that had not occurred. Another customer had signed only a non-binding letter of intent. Recording the revenue early allowed Daniel to meet the performance threshold required for the CEO nomination and a $12 million equity award. Maya refused to approve the entries. 2 days later, Vanessa removed her from the reporting chain and assigned her to a low-level reconciliation project. Maya filed a complaint through the executive office because the normal ethics hotline had been temporarily consolidated during the leadership transition. Vanessa acknowledged receipt. The complaint disappeared. "Why come to me?" I asked. Maya looked embarrassed. "You gave a talk on restructuring governance last year. You said the most dangerous fraud is the kind everyone calls temporary because the person benefiting expects future success to make it true." I remembered the line, "Do you have evidence?" "Not anymore. My access was restricted." "Did you print anything?" "No." "Did you send files to a personal account?" "No." She looked frightened that she had failed. "Good." I said, "Do not break policy. Write a timeline from memory. Include dates, names, meetings, and exact phrases. Do not tell anyone you spoke to me. She nodded. Before leaving, she said, Mr. Hayes told the team the board had already chosen him. He said anyone slowing the transition would not have a place in the new Meridian. Know your place. The phrase had not yet been shouted at me. But Daniel was already using versions of it throughout the company. Place meant whatever position protected his rise. I brought Maya's account to my father and the independent audit committee chair, a former federal prosecutor named Miriam Shaw. Arthur wanted to suspend Daniel immediately. I refused. We have suspicious payments and one witness, I said. If we act now, he will call it political interference. He will call anything he dislikes interference. Then let him sign the final certifications. My father stared at me across the conference table. You are protecting him again. I am protecting the investigation. Are you sure? The question hurt because I was not. Part of me still hoped the affair and the accounting fraud were separate. That Vanessa had manipulated invoices without Daniel understanding. That early revenue recognition reflected aggressive judgment rather than deliberate deception. Marriage teaches you to search for the least destructive explanation. Professional experience teaches you to test it. Miriam approved a 6-week forensic review under the code name Lantern. Only 5 people knew Arthur. Miriam. David Chen from Audit Council. The lead forensic accountant. And me. We obtained authority through the controlling trust's information rights. The board continued the CEO selection process. Daniel interpreted the lack of resistance as confirmation that no one had discovered anything. His confidence expanded. He began holding leadership meetings in the future CEO office. He ordered the communications team to produce a documentary about his career. He selected the ballroom for his ceremony and approved a live broadcast to every Meridian site. Employees need a unifying moment, he told the board. What he wanted was a coronation. What we needed was a time-stamped record. Lantern found more than I expected. Daniel and Vanessa had created a shadow approval process inside his office. Vendors favored by them bypassed procurement. Complaints involving Daniel were routed to Vanessa and marked resolved without investigation. Expense reports were split below review thresholds. Corporate aircraft use was described as customer travel even when no customer attended. 2 women who reported inappropriate comments from Daniel were transferred. A third accepted a confidential settlement after Vanessa threatened to characterize her complaint as retaliation for a poor performance review. Vanessa was not simply a mistress receiving gifts. She was the gatekeeper who converted Daniel's personal desires into administrative outcomes. In exchange, he promised to make her chief of staff after his appointment, grant her stock options, and end our marriage before the annual leadership retreat. We found the promise in a deleted message recovered from a company device. Once the vote is done, Claire becomes a private issue. Daniel wrote. Vanessa replied, make sure she does not attend the ceremony. He wrote, she will come if I ask. I want her to see the difference between being married to power and having it. I read that exchange alone. It took several minutes before I could move. Daniel wanted me at the ceremony. Vanessa's invitation had not been an administrative mistake. My husband wanted an audience for my demotion. He believed my value came from standing beside him and intended to show me that another woman now occupied the position. The realization clarified something the affair alone had not. Daniel did not merely stop loving me. He needed me to witness his contempt because humiliation would convert his betrayal into proof of dominance. I closed the message and returned to the audit. Emotion could wait. Evidence had deadlines. The forensic team traced $6.8 million in false or inflated vendor payments. At least $2.1 million returned indirectly for Daniel and Vanessa's benefit. The premature revenue entries overstated performance by nearly 17%. Daniel's proposed bonus relied on those figures. A private consulting agreement promised Vanessa's brother a share of the equity award after Daniel became CEO. Another document showed Daniel planning to remove the independent compliance director within 30 days. He described her as structurally disloyal. The phrase meant she reported to the board instead of him. We also discovered that Daniel had pressured the company's general counsel to prepare a statement describing his appointment as unanimous before the vote occurred. The general counsel refused. Daniel began interviewing replacements. The company was not experiencing isolated misconduct. It was approaching capture. If Daniel became CEO with the proposed authority, he would control hiring, internal investigations, vendor selection, and information reaching the board. The majority trust could remove him later, but not before employees, contracts, and evidence were harmed. Miriam recommended canceling the ceremony and announcing an investigation. I argued for preserving the final meeting. He believes approval is guaranteed. I said, let him present the numbers, affirm the controls, and accept responsibility on record. Arthur leaned back. And your marriage, what about it? He plans to humiliate you publicly. Then we will learn whether his private cruelty changes when cameras are present. My father's face hardened. You do not have to stand there while he does this. I am not standing there for him. Why are you standing there? For every employee he told to know their place. Arthur said nothing for a long time. Finally, he agreed on conditions. Security would be present. The board would retain control of the broadcast. The audit committee would prepare suspension notices. The trust would not cast its vote until Daniel completed his presentation. If he attempted to destroy evidence or leave with company devices, counsel would intervene. We did not anticipate physical violence. That failure belongs to me as much as anyone. Daniel had never hit me. He had punched walls during arguments and once grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks. But he apologized immediately and blamed stress. I classified those incidents as loss of control rather than warning. In truth, they were demonstrations of control. He stopped when he saw fear and became gentle when he believed the lesson had landed. Vanessa knew more about his temper. Recovered messages showed him describing employees he wanted to break and bragging that I always calmed down when he raised his voice. Claire hates scenes. He wrote, she will do anything to preserve dignity. He was right about the woman I had been. He was wrong about what dignity required after I understood the cost. The week before the ceremony, Daniel behaved as though the appointment had already rewritten our marriage. He sent me a schedule prepared by Vanessa. It instructed me to arrive through the west entrance, sit at a table with spouses, avoid approaching the stage, and remain available for photographs after the announcement. Under wardrobe notes, Vanessa had written neutral colors preferred. Daniel called that evening to ask whether I received it. Your secretary sent me instructions for attending my husband's ceremony. I said, she is coordinating 500 people. She also told me where to sit. There is a protocol. Is there a protocol for wives? He exhaled. Claire, please do not turn this into a contest with Vanessa. I did not mention a contest. I know how you get when another woman is successful. The accusation was so detached from reality that it almost sounded rehearsed. Laughter. We found a message from Vanessa recommending he frame any objection as jealousy. Do not defend me. She wrote, make Claire defend herself. It was an efficient tactic. If I denied jealousy, the discussion became about my emotions rather than their conduct. I stopped participating. What time should your wife arrive? I asked. Daniel paused. 7. I will be there. And Claire, yes. This night matters to me. Do not embarrass me. I was going to say the same thing. He hung up. The morning of the ceremony, Meridian's internal network displayed a countdown. Employees at facilities across the country were invited to watch the live stream. Posters showed Daniel standing with his arms crossed beneath the words, The next era begins. The board had not approved those materials. Vanessa authorized them through the transition office. The company spent more than $400,000 on the event, including travel, staging, lighting, executive gifts, and a documentary video that described Daniel as the architect of Meridian's recovery. The documentary never mentioned the Bennett Trust or the emergency capital. It showed archival footage of Daniel on the plant floor and implied his leadership alone saved 12,000 jobs. I watched the rehearsal from a private monitor with Miriam and David. Daniel practiced walking on stage while employees applauded on cue. Vanessa adjusted his tie. At one point, she kissed his cheek and laughed when he looked toward the empty area where I would sit. "They are already performing," Miriam said. "They believe performance is the result." I replied. Arthur arrived quietly at 6:30 and entered through the service corridor. Publicly, he was introduced as chairman of Bennett Global and representative of Meridian's principal investor. Most employees knew his name, but few had met him. Daniel knew Arthur was my father, yet believed our relationship carried no operational importance. He also believed Arthur respected him. Over the years, my father had treated Daniel with formal courtesy and allowed him to present plans without interruption. Daniel mistook restraint for admiration. He often said Arthur was finally beginning to understand what his daughter had married. My father never corrected him because I asked him not to. That night, he wore a black suit and carried a folder containing the trust's voting certificate. "Last chance to cancel," he told me. No. Last chance to tell him privately. He has had 12 years of private truth available. He chose an audience. Arthur looked toward the monitor where Daniel and Vanessa stood together beneath the stage lights. "Your mother would dislike this. She would dislike him." "She did." I turned toward him. "She never said that. She did not need to. My mother died 4 years before the ceremony. She never learned about the affair. But she saw Daniel's appetite for recognition. When I defended his growing arrogance, she said, 'Be careful of anyone who treats your silence as proof they are larger than you.' I thought she was protecting family pride. She was protecting me. At 7:15, I entered the ballroom wearing a dark blue dress with long sleeves. Vanessa had requested neutral colors. Blue was my mother's favorite. Employees turned to look because spouses were rarely present at executive events. Some recognized me from company dinners. Others knew only that Daniel had a wife who worked somewhere outside Meridian. Vanessa placed me at a table near the side wall beside 3 spouses and 2 retired directors. My name card read Claire Hayes. Not Claire Bennett. Not corporate advisor. Not truste. Just the marital name connecting me to the man on stage. Daniel approached 10 minutes before the program. Cameras followed him. He kissed my cheek without touching me anywhere else. "You look appropriate," he said. "You look promoted." He smiled. "Tonight changes everything." "I know." His eyes searched mine. "Do you more than you think?" Vanessa appeared beside him, carrying a tablet. She wore a fitted white dress beneath a cream jacket. Closer to bridal styling than office attire. "Danielle, the media line is ready," she said. Then she looked at me. "Mrs. Hayes." After the remarks, "Please remain seated until the executive photographs are complete." "Will wives be included?" I asked. "Not in the first set. Which women will?" Her smile did not move. "Leadership." Daniel touched her back and guided her away. The gesture was intimate enough for nearby people to notice and practiced enough for him to believe it looked professional. A retired director at my table cleared his throat. "Transitions can create unusual dynamics," he said. "So can affairs?" I replied. His glass stopped halfway to his mouth. I did not explain. At 7:30, the lights dimmed. The documentary began. Daniel's voice described growing up in a working-class neighborhood, repairing machines with his father, and learning that no institution would give him a place unless he took it. The film showed him at the Milwaukee plant where we met. It showed employees cheering after the bankruptcy rescue. It showed charts of revenue growth, including the inflated figures Lantern had documented. At the end, Daniel appeared on screen walking through an empty factory. "Leadership," he said, "is the courage to act before permission arrives." The line had once sounded inspiring to him. In the ballroom, Arthur wrote it on the margin of the voting document. The master of ceremonies introduced board members, lenders, senior executives, and finally Daniel. 500 people stood. Employees watching remotely sent applause icons across the live stream. Daniel walked onto the stage, raised both hands, and waited for the cheering to settle. He thanked the board, his team, and the investors who trusted vision over fear. He did not thank me. That was expected. Then he thanked Vanessa. Every leader needs someone who understands the mission before it becomes visible to everyone else. He said, "Vanessa Cole has been that person for me." She stood from the front row. The spotlight found her. The applause became uncertain. Daniel held out his hand. Vanessa climbed the stairs and joined him at the center of the stage. Miriam, seated near the board, glanced toward me. I remained still. Vanessa took the microphone. "I have watched Daniel carry this company when others doubted him," she said. "I have watched him sacrifice sleep, comfort, and sometimes personal happiness to protect Meridian." The phrase personal happiness landed exactly where she intended. Several guests looked toward my table. "Tonight," she continued, "we are not only recognizing a new chief executive, we are recognizing the courage to choose a future without apology." Daniel smiled at her. She turned, placed both arms around his neck, and kissed him. It was not a brief mistake. It was a staged declaration lasting long enough for photographers to capture every angle. Daniel kissed her back. The executive team nearest the stage began clapping because they did not know what else to do. A few laughed. Across the ballroom, people looked toward me. Daniel finally stepped away from Vanessa and pretended surprise, but his hand remained at her waist. I stood. The retired director beside me whispered, "Claire, do not." I walked toward the stage. No one stopped me because my name still carried the authority of being Daniel's wife. If nothing else, Vanessa watched me approach with satisfaction. Daniel's expression warned me to cooperate with the humiliation he had arranged. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. "Vanessa," I said, "step away from my husband." My voice was not loud, but the microphones carried it. The ballroom became silent. Vanessa tilted her head. "Your husband," she said. "Daniel has made his choice. The company has not." That sentence changed Daniel's face. It was the first indication that I might know something beyond the affair. He came down one step. "Claire, sit down. Tell her to step away. Do not do this here." She did it here. Vanessa smiled at the crowd. This is exactly the kind of emotional disruption Daniel has been protecting the company from. "You mean the complaints you deleted?" I asked. Her smile vanished. Daniel moved down the remaining steps quickly. He stood inches from me. "Enough. The board should know what she has been doing. You are only here because I allowed it." "Daniel." He put both hands against my shoulders and shoved. I fell backward onto the polished floor. My wrist struck the edge of a chair. A glass shattered nearby. For 1 second, no one moved. Then, 3 men from Daniel's executive circle laughed nervously. As if the violence were an awkward joke, they needed to confirm belonged inside the celebration. Daniel looked down at me and shouted, "Know your place. You are my wife. Do not destroy my career because you cannot handle another woman standing beside me. The microphone captured every word. My father started to rise. I saw him from the floor. I shook my head once. Not yet. I stood without accepting the hands reaching toward me. My wrist hurt. But nothing appeared broken. Vanessa stepped closer to Daniel, as though the floor itself had proven her promotion. The cameras remained live. Daniel realized that and softened his face. Claire is overwhelmed. He told the room, "Please give her privacy." He expected me to leave. I brushed dust from my dress, took out my phone, and sent one message to my father. "Dad, take the stage." Daniel watched me type and smirked. "Calling someone to collect you," he asked. "Calling the chairman." I replied. He laughed because he thought I meant Arthur would comfort his daughter privately. He did not understand that the chairman had been waiting for my instruction as managing trustee. The master of ceremonies attempted to resume the program. Then Arthur stood. Every director rose with him. He walked toward the stage slowly, carrying the black folder. Daniel stepped aside with the respectful smile he used around powerful men. "Arthur," he said, reaching for his hand. My father did not take it. He accepted the microphone and faced the audience. "Before this board considers the appointment of a chief executive," he said, "we must address an act of violence committed by the nominee less than 60 seconds ago." Daniel's smile tightened. "This is a private marital matter," he said. Arthur turned toward him. "You committed it on a company stage, during a company broadcast, against a beneficiary and fiduciary of the company's controlling shareholder. Nothing about it is private." Murmurs moved through the ballroom. Daniel looked at me. Then, back at Arthur. Beneficiary Arthur opened the folder. "There will be no CEO appointment tonight." Vanessa took one step backward. Daniel's voice rose. "The board approved the nomination." "The nomination," Arthur said. "Not the appointment." He looked down at me. "Claire, please join us. The voting trust is waiting for your decision." Daniel stared as I walked up the stairs. "What voting trust?" he asked. My father faced the audience. "The Bennett Industrial Renewal Trust controls 62% of Meridian Dynamics. Its managing trustee is my daughter, Claire Bennett." 500 people became absolutely silent. Daniel looked at me as if I had changed shape. He had known Arthur was my father. He had never imagined the shares belonged under my authority. "That is impossible," he said. "Claire works for a consulting firm. She also controls the investment that prevented Meridian from entering bankruptcy 6 years ago." Arthur replied. Daniel's face drained of color. "You," he whispered. I stood beside my father with one hand resting against my injured wrist. "Yes. You let me think. I let you keep your dignity. You lied to me. I protected the company you claimed to love." He looked around at the board, searching for someone willing to reject the truth. No one moved. Arthur handed me the voting certificate. "The floor is yours." I looked across the ballroom. Employees who had watched Daniel build himself into a myth were now staring at me, trying to understand how the wife seated beside the wall had become the person holding the deciding vote. I could see Maya Ortiz near the back, standing beside other finance employees. Her face showed fear and relief. The live stream counter on the monitor displayed thousands of viewers across Meridian's facilities. Daniel followed my gaze and finally understood that the audience he had assembled could no longer be controlled. "Turn off the broadcast," he told Vanessa. She reached for her tablet. The screen had already been locked by the audit committee. "I cannot," she whispered. Then telecommunications. Miriam Shaw stepped onto the stage. "Communications reports to the board during this meeting," she said. Daniel turned on her. "This is a coup." "No," Miriam replied. "This is governance." I took the microphone. My hand was steady. though my wrist throbbed beneath the sleeve of my dress. The board was scheduled to vote tonight on Daniel Hayes's appointment as chief executive. Before that vote, the Bennett Industrial Renewal Trust requested a forensic review of the financial statements supporting his nomination. Daniel interrupted. "You investigated me without disclosure?" The controlling shareholder exercised contractual audit rights after irregular vendor payments and revenue entries were identified. "You used our marriage to spy on the company." "I did not use our marriage. I used financial statements." I nodded toward the main screen. The celebratory image of Daniel disappeared. In its place appeared 3 vendor names, payment totals, and ownership links. Over the past 18 months, Meridian paid $6.8 million to entities that provided little or no verifiable service. 2 are connected to Vanessa Cole's family and personal associates. A third transferred funds into accounts used for travel, jewelry, housing, and other benefits linked to Daniel and Vanessa. Vanessa stepped forward. "That is false. Those vendors supported confidential projects." Miriam held up a hand. "You will have an opportunity to respond through counsel. Do not access or alter any device." Vanessa's eyes went to the ballroom doors. Security officers moved into visible positions. Daniel laughed once, but the sound contained no confidence. $6 million in a company this size is not evidence of fraud. It is a rounding error in strategic development. Employees reacted. The phrase exposed more than he realized. $6.8 million represented years of wages for many people in that room. The amount is not the only issue, I said. The screen changed to contract summaries. Meridian recorded revenue from agreements that were not final and eterated on prosen. One customer had signed only a non-binding letter of intent. Another contract depended on regulatory approval. Those entries increased reported growth enough to satisfy the performance threshold for Daniel's CEO nomination and proposed equity award. Daniel looked toward the chief financial officer, Martin Vale. Martin remained seated, sweating visibly. Finance approved those entries. Daniel said. Finance was pressured to approve them. I replied. When analysts objected, they were reassigned. Complaints were routed to Vanessa's office and removed. Maya's timeline appeared without her name. Meeting dates. Instructions. Access changes. Deleted complaints. Daniel pointed toward the screen. These are allegations from disgruntled employees. They are supported by email. System logs. Recorded meetings. Vendor banking records. And drafts signed by you. Signed drafts are not final actions. The revenue certification you submitted to the board yesterday was final. Miriam produced a printed document. You certified that the financial statements were accurate, that all material-related party relationships had been disclosed, and that no officer had interfered with internal reporting. Daniel's eyes moved across the room. My legal team prepared that. Meridian's general counsel, Susan Park, stood from the board table. We prepared a standard certification. You revised it and signed it. Under incomplete information, you instructed finance to create the information. His expression turned hard. Susan, remember who appointed you? The board appointed me, she said. You tried to replace me. Applause began somewhere near the employee tables. It was brief and immediately stopped. But Daniel heard it. The room no longer belonged to him. Vanessa moved closer to the microphone. Daniel trusted the people around him. If vendors misrepresented work, he is not responsible for every invoice. I looked at her. Were you responsible for this? The screen displayed an email from Vanessa to her brother split the next invoice into 3 approvals. Anything above 250 triggers committee review. Use market activation. Not events. Daniel wants no questions before the vote. Vanessa went still. That message is privileged company material. It is company evidence. Another email appeared. Daniel to Vanessa. Once I have the appointment. Compliance reports through us. Clear the old complaints before transition. Vanessa. Already handled. Daniel. That is why you belong beside me. The same people who had applauded their kiss now stared at them with disgust. Daniel stepped toward me. Security moved closer. You planned this, he said. You came here to destroy me. I came here to vote. You could have spoken to me privately. Maya Ortiz tried to speak through the ethics process. Vanessa deleted her complaint. Susan tried to raise disclosure issues. You threatened to replace her. Finance questioned revenue. You removed access. Privacy was the place where you buried every warning. This is about the affair. The affair explains why you spent company money. It does not explain away the fraud. You are angry because I chose Vanessa. You did not choose Vanessa. You chose entitlement. She was simply willing to invoice it. Vanessa inhaled sharply. I did not say it to humiliate her. I said it because the record required accurate language. Daniel turned toward Arthur. You are allowing your daughter to use shareholder power for personal revenge. My father's voice remained calm. The audit began before tonight. Your shove did not create the evidence. It only ended Claire's decision to protect your privacy. That was true. Until Daniel pushed me. I had intended the board to suspend him after the ceremony and issue a restrained statement about financial irregularities. I had planned to file for divorce privately. I had not planned to reveal that the trust saved Meridian or that I controlled it. Even after learning, he wanted me at the ceremony as a target. Part of me remained committed to preserving the company from scandal. Lying on the floor changed the calculation. Daniel had used the public nature of the event as a weapon. Hiding the truth would have allowed him to call the violence a misunderstanding and the audit a jealous wife's retaliation. The live record protected employees. The board. And me. This is my company. Daniel said. I built it. Arthur looked at him. The company existed before you. It would have died without me. It would have died without the capital Claire secured. I led the turnaround. You participated in it. I saved 12,000 jobs. I took the microphone again. The trust provided emergency liquidity when payroll was 9 days from failure. It purchased debt when every lender refused extension. It agreed to keep the plants operating on the condition that management protect employment targets. You presented those conditions as your own values. Daniel looked at me with naked hatred. You let me stand in front of the industry and take credit. You never asked whom to thank. Because you wanted power over me. No, I wanted you to become the man you said you were, without feeling bought by my family. You made me look like a fool. You did that when you accepted credit without curiosity. His executive friends no longer laughed. One of them, the head of sales, moved his chair away from the aisle as though physical distance could erase years of approval. Daniel noticed. All of you benefited, he said. Do not pretend you did not know how the numbers were made. That sentence created a new silence. Several executives looked down. Miriam made a knot. Daniel realized too late that anger had widened the investigation. I was speaking generally, he said. You were speaking on a recorded company broadcast. Susan replied. Vanessa reached for Daniel's arm. He shook her off. This is your fault, he whispered. The microphones captured that too. Her face changed. My fault. You pushed the public announcement. You wanted her here. I told you to manage her. I am not responsible for your wife owning the company. Neither am I. I said, the trust owns the shares. I am responsible for the vote. Arthur placed the written resolutions on the lectern. The trust decision included 5 actions. First, to reject Daniel's appointment as chief executive. Second, suspend him from all duties pending investigation. Third, freeze his proposed equity award. Bonus, and access to company systems. Fourth, suspend Vanessa and preserve all devices and records under her control. Fifth, authorize outside counsel to refer evidence to civil and criminal authorities. The trust's 62% made the outcome certain. But independent directors also needed to record their votes. Arthur asked whether I was prepared. Daniel stepped between me and the lectern. Claire, think about what you are doing. I have 12 years. Yes. Everything I built. Everything you build. Do not make a permanent decision because of one moment. I looked at the floor where I had fallen. This investigation contains 18 months of moments. His voice softened. It was the voice he used after punching a wall. After gripping my wrist. After turning cruelty into stress. Come home with me. We will fix the accounts. I will end things with Vanessa. We can explain the shove. I lost control because you confronted me in front of everyone. You did not lose control. I said, you used it. Claire. Move away from the lectern. He did not. Security approached. Daniel lifted both hands and stepped back. Fine. Vote. But you will regret turning our marriage into a corporate spectacle. You did that when you placed your mistress on the stage. I signed the first resolution. The Bennett Industrial Renewal Trust votes against the appointment of Daniel Hayes as Chief Executive Officer. A visible wave passed through the room. Daniel's ceremonial title disappeared before it legally existed. I signed the second. The trust votes to suspend Daniel Hayes from all executive and operational authority effective immediately. Susan deactivated his credentials from her tablet. His phone vibrated as access notifications arrived. I signed the third. The trust votes to freeze all unpaid incentive compensation and equity awards pending recovery claims. Daniel's face tightened. The compensation package he believed would secure his independence vanished into investigation. I signed the fourth. The trust votes to suspend Vanessa Cole and preserve all records. Vanessa looked toward Daniel. He would not meet her eyes. I signed the fifth. The trust authorizes referral of evidence to appropriate authorities and full cooperation with any inquiry. Arthur asked the independent directors to vote. Ane be ane. They approved. 2 abstained. None opposed. The acting chief financial officer, Martin Vale, requested to make a statement. He admitted Daniel had pressured his team to recognize revenue early and said he had failed to inform the audit committee. Miriam accepted his resignation effective immediately and instructed him to remain available. Daniel stared at the board table. Cowards, he said. Every one of you. Then he turned to the crowd. Meridian will collapse without me. These people know it. From the back of the ballroom, someone said, "We were here before you." It was a production supervisor from the Milwaukee plant. Others began murmuring agreement. Daniel's entire self-image depended on being the company's indispensable center. Hearing employees reject that story wounded him more deeply than losing the vote. He looked at me again. Stop the live stream. No. Claire. Please. It was the first time that night he used the word please. My parents are watching. The press is watching. You have made your point. The broadcast was your idea. This is different. Because you are the one being humiliated. He lowered his voice. Do not do this to me. You were comfortable doing it to me when you believed no one important was watching. Everyone was watching. That is the problem. He glanced toward the nearest camera. Then dropped to one knee. Gasps moved through the ballroom. For half a second, I thought he might apologize. Instead, he reached for my hand and said, "Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Say, we will resolve it privately. You can keep control of the trust. I do not care. Just do not let them take everything left." He was not asking for our marriage. He was asking for the image, compensation, and career he had built around it. Stand up. I said. Claire. I love you. Vanessa made a sound between a laugh and a sob. Daniel looked toward her as if he had forgotten she was present. You told me you would announce the divorce tonight. She said, Be quiet. You said she was nobody. The words traveled across the microphones. Daniel closed his eyes. Vanessa. Stop. You said her father barely spoke to her. You said she had no role in the company. You said after the vote we would leave together. Anything you say now will be used against you. You were going to blame me. That was not yet something we had revealed. Miriam turned toward her. Why do you believe that Vanessa looked at Daniel? Then at the screen. Then at the security officers. Because he made me sign the vendor certifications. He said executives could not be connected. Daniel rose from his knee. Do not say another word. You said the invoices were temporary. Call your lawyer. You promised we were partners. Call your lawyer. Vanessa. The relationship that had survived secrecy could not survive accurate liability. She stepped away from him. I have copies. She said to Miriam. Message. Personal devices. A second account Daniel does not know I kept. Daniel moved toward her. Security intercepted him. She is lying. He shouted. She created the vendors. She pursued me. She manipulated the expenses. Vanessa stared at him. You told me to delete the complaints. You misunderstood. You told me Maya Ortiz had to be buried before the vote. Maya flinched at the back of the room. Miriam ordered security to escort Vanessa to a private room with counsel and preserve her phone. Daniel struggled against the officers for 1 second. Then saw the cameras and stopped. Susan approached him with a document. Your suspension is effective immediately. Surrender your company phone. Badge. Laptop. Case. And any storage device. I am not handing over privileged material. The privilege belongs to the company. He looked toward the side doors. 2 investigators from the State Financial Crimes Unit entered. They had been waiting outside under Miriam's coordination. No arrest occurred that night. But Daniel understood what their presence meant. The ceremony he designed to confirm his power had become a preservation site. Employees were instructed to remain while legal teams secured records. The party music never resumed. Staff removed the banner that read, "The next era begins." Beneath it, the wall was blank. A company nurse examined my wrist in a private room behind the ballroom. It was badly bruised but not broken. A photographer documented the swelling. The torn seam of my dress, and the red marks on my shoulders. I wanted to refuse. The instinct to minimize private harm remained even after Daniel had made it public. Miriam noticed my hesitation. The record should not depend on whether you feel strong tomorrow. She said. I allowed the photographs. A police officer took my statement. I described the shove without adding adjectives. Daniel placed both hands on my shoulders and pushed backward. I fell. He said. Know your place. Facts sounded colder than anger and carried farther. My father waited outside the room. When the officer left, Arthur entered and looked at my wrist. I should have stopped him. He said. You could not know. I knew enough. So did I. We sat in silence. For years, I had blamed my father for seeing danger in Daniel before I did. That night, he blamed himself for respecting my choices after they became dangerous. Neither blame changed the sequence. Daniel had made the decisions. I protected his dignity. I said, You protected 12,000 jobs. I also protected him. Yes. Arthur did not soften the truth to comfort me. That was one reason I trusted him again. Do you want to go home? He asked. Home had become a question. Daniel and I lived in a modern house outside the city, purchased jointly 8 years earlier. He knew the security codes. His clothes filled half the closets. His photographs stood on shelves. I did not know whether he had already left the ballroom or whether he intended to return and rewrite the night before I could stabilize it. Not yet, I said. I want the evidence inventory. The audit team converted 2 conference rooms into collection stations. Employees surrendered devices. Servers were imaged. Access logs were preserved. Vanessa sat with an independent lawyer and began identifying accounts. Daniel remained in another room with counsel provided under the company's advancement policy. Though the board reserved the right to recover fees if misconduct was proven, he repeatedly requested to speak with me. I refused. At midnight, his lawyer approached David Chen and proposed a private resolution. Daniel would resign, surrender part of his compensation, and issue a statement citing marital stress if the company agreed not to refer evidence, and if I did not pursue the assault. The offer proved he still believed every consequence had a price. David asked whether the proposal included full restitution, cooperation, and admission. It did not. Then there is nothing to discuss, I said. By 2 a.m, Vanessa had provided credentials for a cloud account, a private messaging application, and 2 external drives stored in her apartment. She claimed Daniel instructed her to create the vendors, split invoices, remove complaints, and prepare false revenue summaries. She also admitted receiving gifts and expecting equity. Her lawyer emphasized cooperation. Miriam emphasized preservation. No one offered immunity. Vanessa asked whether I would speak to her. I declined. She had kissed my husband on stage. But that was not the reason. I declined because every conversation before counsel finished collecting evidence created risk. Emotional confrontation could wait. The company could not. At 3, security escorted Daniel from the building through a service entrance. Reporters had gathered at the main doors after clips from the live stream spread online. Daniel's shove, Arthur's announcement, and my vote had already been replayed thousands of times. The public saw 8 minutes. Investigators saw years. Daniel covered his face with a folder as he entered a car arranged by his lawyer. He did not go home. GPS records later showed he checked into a hotel near the airport under an employee's reservation. I returned to our house with my father and 2 security professionals. We did not enter until they confirmed Daniel was absent. Inside, the rooms looked unchanged. His watch lay on the kitchen counter. A coffee cup sat beside the sink. A printed speech rested in his office. On the first page, he had written a final line for the ceremony, tonight. Meridian stops asking permission from the past. I read it twice. The past he wanted to escape included the capital that saved the company, the employees who remembered his original values, and the wife whose silence supported his legend. In his desk, legal counsel found a folder labeled Personal Transition. It contained a draft divorce petition, a proposed statement announcing that Daniel and I had separated months earlier, and a settlement offer prepared without my knowledge. The offer assumed I would keep our house and personal investments while waiving any claim to his future CEO compensation. It described my family trust as separate and irrelevant. Daniel believed I was financially comfortable enough to accept humiliation quietly. A handwritten note from Vanessa appeared in the margin. Announce after appointment. Position Claire as supportive but private. The petition accused me of emotional withdrawal, excessive travel, and unwillingness to support Daniel's career. It did not mention an affair. It requested that personal matters remain confidential to protect Meridian. He intended to use the company's reputation to silence me while using its money to reward Vanessa. We also found a second phone inside a locked drawer. The device contained messages with other women going back 7 years. Vanessa was not the first affair. She was the first he planned to promote as part of his public identity. Some relationships lasted weeks. One lasted nearly a year. Daniel told each woman a variation of the same story. I was cold, controlling, more loyal to my father than my husband. and incapable of appreciating a self-made man. He described my career as a hobby financed by family money, even though my firm's earnings had supported us during his early years. The lies were not improvised. They formed an alternate biography where every sacrifice I made became evidence against me. I sat on the floor of his office reading until dawn. My father asked me to stop. "There may be more." I said, "There will always be more. I need to know." "You need enough to act. You do not need every wound." He was right. But pain creates an appetite for total explanation. If I found every message, perhaps I could identify the exact moment our marriage became false. There was no single moment. Daniel accumulated permissions I never gave and resentments I never understood. He became the man revealed at the ceremony through thousands of smaller choices. At 7, I called a divorce attorney named Lena Morales. I had worked with her on corporate disputes involving family-owned businesses. She was direct, discreet, and unimpressed by power. I explained the assault, affair, financial investigation, and draft petition. "Do you want to file today?" she asked. "Yes." "Do you want exclusive use of the house?" "Yes." "Do you fear he will return?" I looked at the red marks on my shoulders. "I fear he believes he still has the right." Lena filed for dissolution, emergency exclusive occupancy, preservation of marital assets, and temporary no-contact terms except through counsel. We did not rely only on the company investigation. We documented household accounts, property records, insurance policies, travel expenses, and devices. Daniel had transferred $400,000 from a joint investment account into an entity connected to a college friend. He labeled it a private opportunity. The friend returned the funds after receiving a preservation notice and claimed he did not know they were marital. Daniel had also borrowed against his expected CEO equity before the award existed. A private lender advanced him $2 million based on a compensation letter Vanessa drafted and Daniel signed. Part of the money paid for the condominium, travel, and Vanessa's jewelry. The rest covered earlier losses from a speculative cryptocurrency investment. Daniel's lifestyle was not funded by success. It was funded by expected success, pledged repeatedly before arrival. The CEO appointment was meant to turn promises into collateral OPRIs. Losing it caused every hidden obligation to surface at once. By noon, the court granted temporary exclusive occupancy. Daniel's access codes were changed under supervision. His personal belongings were inventoried and transferred to a secure storage facility. I did not throw anything onto the lawn. I did not destroy suits or photographs. Procedure denied him the image of an irrational wife. Every item received a number. Every action had a witness. At 4 that afternoon, Daniel arrived at the gate. News cameras followed at a distance. He entered the old code 3 times. Then pressed the intercom. I watched from the security monitor while an officer provided the court order. Daniel demanded to speak to me. The officer refused. He looked directly into the camera above the gate. "Claire, this has gone far enough," he said. I activated the intercom from the library. "Contact Lena. You filed for divorce." "Yes." "Because of one shove. Because of 12 years. You cannot erase a marriage in one day. You prepared the petition before I did." His face changed. "You searched my office. Company counsel preserved relevant devices. My attorney found the draft in our house. That was contingency planning. So is divorce." He leaned toward the camera. "Vanessa meant nothing. She meant enough to put on stage. I was managing an employee." With your mouth, his expression hardened. "You think this is funny?" "No." "Then, stop performing for the cameras. They followed you. Come outside." "No. We need to talk without your father and lawyers telling you what to think. That is exactly why we will communicate through lawyers." "Claire, you are making a mistake. I made the mistake 6 years ago when I confused protecting your pride with protecting our marriage. Daniel looked around at the cameras. Officer. And locked gate. Where am I supposed to go? The hotel you used last night? My cards are frozen. Your personal account remains available. There is barely anything in it. Then you should ask, what happened to the income you earned? He hit the intercom panel with the heel of his hand. The officer stepped closer. Daniel stopped. You enjoyed that stage. He said, you enjoyed showing everyone that your family bought my career. My family bought debt. You chose what to do with the opportunity. You wanted me dependent. I wanted you alive professionally. Same thing to you. He walked back toward the car. Before entering, he turned and shouted, Meridian will beg me to return. The company did not. The next morning, the board appointed Susan Park and the head of operations as interim co-leaders while a search began. I accepted the role of executive chair for 90 days. Limited to governance, investigation, and stabilization. I did not take Daniel's office. I used a small conference room on the 4th floor. His name was removed from the door only after evidence technicians completed their work. Employees received a message acknowledging the violence, financial review, and leadership changes. It did not minimize the affair or describe the shove as a personal dispute. We established an independent hotline outside the executive office and guaranteed protection for anyone reporting retaliation. Within 72 hours, 46 complaints arrived. Not all involved Daniel directly. Some described executives who copied his methods: intimidation, hidden expenses, promotions tied to loyalty, and pressure to manipulate metrics. Culture does not spread through policy manuals. It spreads through what leaders survive. Daniel had survived enough misconduct to teach others that results created immunity. Rebuilding Meridian required more than removing him. It required removing the incentives that made his behavior useful to others. The first all-employee meeting after the ceremony took place 5 days later. I stood on the same stage where Daniel shoved me. The floor had been polished. The broken glass was gone. The physical evidence of the night had disappeared faster than the emotional one. Employees filled the ballroom without music or banners. Remote facilities joined by video. I began with the fact no executive statement could soften. What happened here was violence. I said, it was also the visible result of a system that allowed one person's ambition to outrank truth. I told them the board had opened an independent investigation, that no employee would be punished for good faith cooperation, and that prior complaints could be resubmitted directly to outside counsel. I did not describe myself as a victim or owner. I described the trust's responsibility. 62% of voting power creates an obligation, not a crown. The purpose of control is not to replace one unquestioned leader with another. Some employees applauded. Others remained cautious. They had heard speeches before. Trust rebuilds through repeated outcomes. Not one correct statement. Maya Ortiz sat in the second row. After the meeting, she waited until most people left. I am sorry about what happened, she said. You warned us before it did. I warned you about the numbers. You warned us about him. She shook her head. I should have gone to the board sooner. The company told you the executive office was the ethics channel. You followed the process. The process was captured. Will I get my position back? You will be offered restoration or another role without penalty. The decision will be yours. Tears entered her eyes. I thought I had ended my career by refusing. Daniel wanted you to believe obedience was the only career path. Maya later became part of the finance remediation team. She did not receive a promotion as a reward for helping us. She earned one after completing the work Daniel tried to bury. That distinction mattered. I did not want Meridian to replace favoritism with heroic favoritism. The audit expanded across 3 years. Vanessa's cooperation identified accounts, but her version initially minimized her own role. She claimed Daniel designed everything. Messages showed she proposed methods for bypassing review, selected vendors, threatened employees, and negotiated her future title. When confronted, she admitted more. Her lawyer sought an agreement with prosecutors and with Resecony. The company did not control that decision. We provided accurate evidence and refused to recommend special treatment. Vanessa requested a private meeting with me through counsel. I agreed after the principal interviews were complete. We met in a neutral conference room with Lena and her lawyer present. Vanessa wore a plain black suit and no jewelry. Without the stage, white dress, and Daniel's authority. She looked smaller but not harmless. "I owe you an apology," she began. "You owe the truth to the investigation. I have given it. You gave it in layers." She lowered her eyes. "I was afraid. Maya was afraid when you deleted her complaint. Daniel said she was trying to sabotage him. And you believed him. I believed he would become CEO. I believed if I was not beside him, someone else would be." Her honesty was ugly and therefore useful. "Why kiss him on stage?" I asked. "He planned it. The messages show you proposed it." Vanessa looked at her lawyer. He nodded for her to answer. "I proposed announcing us. Daniel wanted the kiss because he said you would freeze. He said you would not create a scene. You wanted me humiliated. I wanted the secrecy over. Those are not the same thing." "No?" She folded her hands. "I thought you looked down on me. I recommended that Daniel promote you formally. He told me you were threatened by my competence. He told me you were only an employee." She absorbed that. Daniel had designed two women's perceptions to protect his access to both, yet Vanessa's choices remained hers. "Did you know the revenue was false?" I asked. "I knew some contracts were not complete." "Did you know the vendors were paying for your personal life?" "Yes." "Did you know complaints were legally required to reach compliance?" "Yes." "Then what part did you believe would become acceptable after the appointment?" She did not answer. Her lawyer shifted toward mitigation. "Miss Cole understands that she exercised terrible judgment within a coercive relationship. Daniel did not coerce her into threatening employees." Lena said. "He rewarded it." Vanessa looked at me. "I am not asking you to forgive me." "Good. I need you to know he was going to remove me too." "I know." The second account contained a draft employment agreement limiting Vanessa's authority and allowing termination without equity if reputational issues emerged. Daniel intended to announce her emotionally and contain her legally. He told her she would be chief of staff while preparing to describe her as an assistant who exceeded authority if the audit surfaced. "He used both of us," Vanessa said. "He betrayed both of us." I replied, "But only one of us helped him steal from employees and silence complaints." She cried quietly. I felt no victory. Tears do not restore deleted reports. What happens to you now belongs to the legal process. I said, "What happens to me does not require your participation." I left without shaking her hand. 2 weeks later, the company received a demand letter from Daniel. He claimed wrongful suspension, breach of his compensation agreement, defamation, invasion of privacy, and discriminatory interference by a controlling family shareholder. He demanded $80 million in reinstatement pending arbitration. His filing described the ceremony as a domestic disagreement exploited to reverse a valid appointment. It described Vanessa's kiss as an unexpected personal gesture. It claimed the audit was initiated only after I became jealous. The timeline disproved him. Lantern began 6 weeks before the ceremony. Audit authorizations, vendor subpoenas, and board communications were dated. Daniel's complaint turned those dates into our strongest defense. He also submitted an affidavit stating that he never touched the revenue entries. Forensic metadata showed his account edited the spreadsheets, and a recorded call captured him telling Martin Vale, Book it now. We will earn it before anyone cares. His lawsuit was dismissed from court and moved into contract arbitration, where the company counterclaimed for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, unjust enrichment, and recovery of legal fees. The arbitrator froze his disputed compensation. Private lenders read the filing and accelerated his debts. The $2 million borrowed against the expected equity became due. Daniel's condo interest, watches, vehicle, and investment accounts were attached. He blamed me in every communication. Through the divorce platform, he wrote, "You are letting the company take marital assets." Lena responded that funds obtained through fraudulent company payments were not protected marital property. Daniel wrote, "You always choose your father over me." I replied, "Once I chose evidence over your explanation." After that, Lena handled communication. The criminal investigation moved carefully. Prosecutors wanted proof. Daniel acted intentionally, not merely aggressively. Vanessa's messages helped. But accomplice testimony required corroboration. They found it in a voice recording Daniel made himself. He recorded executive conversations because he feared others would take credit for his ideas. One file captured a meeting with Vanessa and Martin. Martin warned that recording the contracts early violated policy. Daniel said, "Once I am CEO, policy will reflect business reality. We need the number now. Future performance will cure timing." Martin asked what happened if the contracts failed. Daniel replied, "Then finance misunderstood my direction." Vanessa laughed. That sentence established the design. Daniel intended to claim credit if the entries succeeded and blame subordinates if exposed. Another recording captured his discussion of complaints. Vanessa asked whether legal should see them. Daniel said, "Legal sees what protects the company. A CEO transition is more valuable than employees who cannot adapt." "What about Claire?" Vanessa asked. "Claire will be handled after the vote. And Arthur? Arthur wants performance. Old men always respect the winner." My father listened to that recording only once. He thought he understood me. He said, he thought everyone was a version of himself. I replied, "The investigation also reached Daniel's executive circle. The 3 men who laughed when he shoved me had benefited from false revenue and vendor arrangements. One received a bonus tied to inflated sales. Another directed business to Vanessa's brother. The third knew complaints were being removed and told employees not to create career-limiting drama. All 3 were suspended. 2 resigned. 1 cooperated and kept a lower role after returning compensation. The company did not punish laughter as a crime. It examined why the men believed violence against the acting CEO's wife required alliance rather than intervention. Their laughter was evidence of culture. In interviews, each said he had been nervous. One claimed he thought I had tripped. The video showed Daniel's hands and words clearly. People often call cruelty confusing when clarity would require admitting they chose safety beside power. The broader remediation uncovered legitimate business problems hidden by the performance. Meridian had lost 2 major contracts. A product line required expensive redesign. Cash flow was weaker than reported. Once the false revenue was reversed and fraudulent expenses recognized, the company breached a lending covenant. Critics said removing Daniel had caused the crisis. In reality, removing him revealed it. We negotiated temporary lender relief, suspended dividends, reduced executive bonuses, and protected hourly payroll. I took no compensation as executive chair. Arthur wanted the trust to inject more capital immediately. I insisted on operational reforms first. We cannot keep rescuing a company from leaders. It refuses to challenge. I said, the board replaced 3 committees, added employee representation to safety and ethics reviews, and separated the roles of chair and chief executive. We hired an interim CEO named Naomi Brooks, a veteran industrial operator known for quiet discipline. Daniel had once rejected her for a division role, saying she lacked presence. In her first meeting, Naomi asked managers to describe problems without presentations. She listened for 4 hours. Then she published a recovery plan with measurable milestones and named owners. No slogan. No documentary. Employees responded cautiously. Then strongly. Production defects fell. Customer negotiations stabilized. 2 contracts Daniel had recorded prematurely were ultimately signed months later. Proving future success can occur without retroactively making a false statement true. Naomi refused to count the revenue until the conditions were met. Timing is part of truth. She said, I wrote the phrase beside the line Daniel used in his documentary, courage to act, before permission arrives. Leadership sometimes requires acting before applause. It never requires acting before authority when the action transfers other people's money. The divorce discovery exposed another layer of Daniel's resentment. In private journal files, he wrote repeatedly about my father. He believed Arthur's wealth made every achievement of his appear smaller. He resented attending family events where people asked about my restructuring cases rather than his promotions. He described my professional independence as a permanent vote against needing me. He wanted a wife whose success reflected him, not one with authority outside the marriage. Vanessa fit the role because her promotion depended on him. He could call her brilliant while controlling the access that made others see it. With me, he could not own the source of respect. That insecurity did not cause fraud. But it gave fraud a story Daniel told himself. He was not stealing. He was reclaiming. He was not silencing employees. He was protecting momentum. He was not betraying a wife. He was escaping a woman who refused to make him central. Every destructive act entered his mind, wearing the language of justice. Lena asked whether I wanted to read the journals. I read enough. Understanding is becoming another way to keep him in the room. She said, You do not need a perfect theory to leave. I closed the folder. That night, I removed the last framed wedding photograph from the house. I did not destroy it. I placed it in the legal archive because the date and location mattered to certain property records. Even our wedding picture became a document. I felt sad, then strangely free. Memory could exist without remaining on display. 4 months after the ceremony, prosecutors filed charges against Daniel, Vanessa, and 2 vendors. Daniel faced wire fraud, conspiracy, falsification of corporate records, theft through related party transactions, obstruction, and attempted securities-related fraud connected to the false performance certifications. Vanessa faced conspiracy, false invoicing, evidence tampering, and retaliation against employees. Her brother faced fraud and money laundering charges. Martin Vale was not charged after cooperating fully, returning his bonus, and admitting that fear for his career led him to approve entries he knew were improper. He resigned his accounting license temporarily and accepted sanctions. Some employees wanted him prosecuted. Others saw him as another victim of Daniel's pressure. Both views contained part of the truth. Martin had been pressured. He also occupied a role designed to resist pressure and failed. Accountability did not require pretending coercion was irrelevant or complete. Daniel was arrested at the hotel where he had remained since the ceremony. He had booked a flight to the Cayman Islands for the next morning and claimed it was a previously scheduled investor meeting. Investigators found no meeting. They found encrypted drives, 2 passports, and documents showing an attempt to transfer funds into a foreign account. His lawyer called the trip routine business. The judge called it evidence of flight risk and imposed strict conditions, including home confinement at his mother's residence, electronic monitoring, and prohibition from contacting Meridian employees or me. Daniel's mother, Patricia Hayes, gave a statement outside court. She said her son was a visionary punished by a wealthy family for leaving an unhappy marriage. She described me as vindictive and claimed my father had bought the company solely to control Daniel. Reporters asked whether she had watched the video of him shoving me. "Marriage is complicated," she replied. The phrase spread online. Patricia had always excused Daniel's temper as intensity. When he broke a school trophy after losing, she blamed the coach. When he was fired from a college internship for arguing with a supervisor, she said the company feared his talent. She loved him fiercely and protected him from every small correction until only catastrophic correction remained. I did not respond publicly. Meridian issued a factual timeline. The audit began before the ceremony. The appointment was never final. The financial evidence was independent of the affair and assault. Facts did not silence every narrative, but they prevented the loudest lie from becoming the only record. During home confinement, Daniel violated the no-contact order twice. First, he sent flowers to my office with a card. "We survived bankruptcy. We can survive this." Lena returned them and notified the court. Then he used a former employee's account to send me a video message. He sat in his mother's study, wearing a plain shirt, without the suits and stage lighting that once supported his authority. "Claire," he said, "I know you believe you are doing the responsible thing, but you are being manipulated by people who always wanted us apart. Arthur never respected our marriage. Miriam wants publicity. Vanessa is saving herself. You know me. You know I would never intentionally hurt Meridian. I made decisions under pressure because the company needed results. I pushed you because you threatened everything in the worst possible moment. I regret it. But one moment should not erase 15 years. Tell the truth about who I am." He still believed my testimony existed to certify his preferred identity. The truth about who he was could be found in repeated decisions, not the version he narrated after consequences. I forwarded the video to Lena without responding. The judge tightened his communication restrictions. Daniel told his mother I was trying to isolate him. The divorce mediation occurred 6 months after the ceremony. Daniel attended by secure video because of his criminal conditions. He looked older, thinner, and furious beneath attempted calm. His settlement proposal requested a share of our house equity, retirement accounts, and consulting earnings. It also demanded that I disclaim any personal role in the Meridian investigation and support a statement that our marital conflict contributed to misunderstandings at the company. In exchange, he offered to waive claims against the Bennett Trust. Lena almost smiled. "He cannot waive claims he does not possess," she said. Daniel's attorney asked for privacy while the criminal case remained pending. I offered a straightforward division under our prenuptial agreement in state law, adjusted for unauthorized transfers. Daniel rejected it. He addressed me directly. "You are letting Arthur use the divorce to punish me. My father is not a party to the marriage. He was always a party. Only because you measured yourself against him. You hid the ownership. The trust was disclosed in our prenuptial schedules as separate family property." Daniel looked at his attorney. The document appeared on screen. He had signed an acknowledgement 12 years earlier. At the time, he believed Bennett assets were irrelevant because he would become wealthier. He had insisted on protecting his future earnings from my family. The agreement separated inheritances, trusts, premarital holdings, and business interests. It required disclosure of debts and prohibited unauthorized use of joint funds for third parties. Daniel's affairs and hidden loans placed him in breach. I did not understand that the trust could own Meridian. He said, "It did not when we married." Lena replied, "The agreement covers future family investments." Claire should have told me. A spouse may have emotional reasons to disclose. The mediator said, "But the legal ownership is clear." Daniel leaned toward the camera. "Do you hear how they talk? Everything is technical. Nothing about love." I answered before Lena could stop me. Love is the reason I saved Meridian without taking credit. Technical terms are what remain after you use that love against me." He went silent. Mediation failed. The divorce proceeded to trial on limited financial issues. The court confirmed the trust, and Meridian shares were separate, awarded me exclusive ownership of my consulting practice, and assigned Daniel responsibility for undisclosed personal debt. Joint assets were divided after restitution claims. His share was smaller than expected because he had depleted accounts and used marital funds for Vanessa. The court ordered reimbursement for those expenditures. Daniel requested spousal support based on the lifestyle we shared. The judge denied it, noting his earning capacity, misconduct, and the prenuptial agreement. He appealed. The appeal failed. Our marriage ended 11 months after the ceremony. I left the courthouse without celebration. Lena asked whether I wanted lunch. I said I wanted to go to the Milwaukee plant. The plant where Daniel and I met had survived every ownership change. I walked through the production floor with Naomi Brooks. Some employees had worked there long enough to remember us as young people arguing beside the conveyor line. A maintenance supervisor named Robert greeted me. He was the same worker. Daniel helped repair the sensor 15 years earlier. His hair was gray now. I watched the ceremony. He said, "Everyone did. I am sorry you had to." I am sorry he forgot who he was. We stood beside the modernized line. "Did he?" I asked. Robert considered the question. Maybe he remembered only the parts that sounded good in speeches. That answer stayed with me. Daniel's early loyalty may have been real. People are not born as final versions of themselves. But good intentions do not create permanent credit. Each promotion offered him another chance to choose what kind of leader he would become. He chose applause over accountability until he could no longer distinguish them. The criminal case went to trial 14 months after the ceremony. Vanessa pleaded guilty first. In exchange for cooperation, she admitted conspiracy, false invoicing, retaliation, and destruction of records. She agreed to restitution and surrendered profits, jewelry, and equity interests. Her testimony described the affair and scheme in detail. She said Daniel taught her to categorize every transaction by the explanation they would use if questioned. Romantic travel became vendor development. Jewelry became stakeholder gifts. False contracts became future revenue. Complaints became performance disputes. He said language decides whether an act looks criminal. She testified. The prosecutor asked, "Did you believe changing the label changed the act I wanted to?" She described the CEO ceremony plan. "We wanted Claire to understand the marriage was over after Daniel had the position. He believed she would remain silent to protect the company." "Why did you kiss him publicly? To make the change irreversible." "Did it?" Vanessa looked toward me. "No." Her cooperation did not erase what she did. The judge later sentenced her to 28 months in federal custody. Supervised release, a restitution, and a prohibition from serving in a corporate compliance or payment approval role for 5 years. Her brother received a longer sentence because he laundered funds through multiple accounts and fabricated records after receiving subpoenas. Vanessa's lawyer asked me for a victim impact statement focused on Daniel rather than her. I refused to divide responsibility for her convenience. I wrote that Vanessa used professional access to facilitate fraud, silence women, and convert company resources into personal status. I also acknowledged her cooperation helped recover funds and expose the full scheme. Accuracy did not require cruelty or rescue. Daniel chose trial. His defense argued the company's accounting decisions were aggressive but lawful. Vendors delivered intangible strategic value. And the board used marital scandal to remove a successful leader. They portrayed Vanessa as the architect of false invoices and me as a controlling shareholder with a personal motive. The opening statement described Daniel as a self-made executive trapped between an ambitious assistant and an estranged wife whose family secretly held power. The story appealed to his identity. The evidence did not. Prosecutors presented bank transfers, messages, recordings, systemlogs, false contracts, suppressed complaints, and Daniel's signed certifications. Maya testified about revenue pressure. Susan described his attempt to control legal reporting. Martin admitted approving entries after Daniel threatened his position. The vendor review showed no work, supporting millions in payments. Employees described retaliation. Security video showed the shove from 4 angles. The defense objected that the assault was prejudicial and unrelated to accounting. The judge allowed limited use because Daniel's statements at the ceremony related to his authority. Response to investigation. An attempt to silence me. The jury watched him say, "Know your place," then claimed the company was his. They watched the board reveal the audit. They watched him ask to turn off the broadcast only after his own conduct became visible. I testified for 2 days. The prosecutor began with Meridian's rescue. Why was the investment structured anonymously, he asked. To protect the company from disruption, and because Daniel rejected the idea of assistance from my family. Did you intend to control his career? No. Did you control the vote? Yes. As managing trustee, why not tell him I believed protecting his pride would protect our marriage? Was that belief correct? No. He asked about the audit. Maya's complaint. Vendor findings. And ceremony. I described each step. When we reached the shove, the courtroom became very quiet. What did you understand when Mr. Faden? Hayes told you to know your place, that he believed my place was whatever allowed him to remain unchallenged. What was your actual role in that room? I was his wife. The managing trustee of the controlling shareholder, and a person he had no right to touch. The defense attorney suggested I created a trap. You allowed the ceremony to continue after discovering irregularities. The board needed Daniel's final certifications and presentation. You expected him to expose his affair. I expected him to present the company's numbers. You knew Vanessa planned something. I knew they wanted me present. I did not know he would shove me. But you brought your father. He was attending as chairman of the controlling investor, and you sent him a dramatic message. After I was assaulted, you could have called security. I called the person authorized to stop the vote. The attorney asked whether I enjoyed revealing ownership. No. You smiled on the video. People smile under stress. You wanted Mr. Sixident. Hayes humiliated. I wanted the appointment stopped and the evidence preserved. Why keep the live stream running? Because Daniel had already used the live audience to describe me as unstable. Turning it off would have allowed him to control what employees were told afterward. So you wanted everyone to see him fall. I wanted everyone to see the same facts. The attorney changed direction. Is it true your father disliked Mr. Bowden? Hayes, my father distrusted his need for unearned credit. That was not my question. My father attended our wedding and approved the investment that saved Daniel's company. Because you asked him. Yes, you used family power to advance your husband. I used capital to save Meridian. Daniel advanced through board decisions. Decisions influenced by your trust. The trust supported plans that protected value and employees. It did not require the board to promote Daniel. The attorney held up an old email where I praised Daniel's leadership during the rescue. You recommended him. At that time, I believed the recommendation. And years later, after discovering an affair, you changed your mind. After discovering false invoices, revenu manipulation, retaliation, and an affair financed through company money. Your emotions played no role. My emotions informed my divorce. Evidence informed my vote. The distinction survived every question. Daniel testified against his attorney's advice. He wore a dark suit without the custom cufflinks he once considered part of his executive identity. He spoke directly to the jury and described Meridian as his life's work. He said the company had been minutes from collapse and that he made decisions no cautious investor could understand. He admitted the affair but called it unrelated to business. He admitted approving vendors but said Vanessa controlled documentation. He admitted pushing me but described it as a reflex after I disrupted a critical corporate event. Every admission arrived wrapped in necessity. The prosecutor asked whether the $6.8 million in vendor payments produced measurable work. Daniel said leadership strategy could not always be measured. Could hotel suites be measured? The prosecutor asked. Travel was part of relationship development. Which customer attended the Napa weekend? I do not recall. Which stakeholder received the diamond bracelet? Vanessa managed gifts. She wore it. She may have purchased it afterward. The receipt showed Meridian's shell vendor paid the jeweler. Daniel said he had not reviewed the receipt. The prosecutor played a message where he wrote, "Get the emerald one. Claire never wears color." Vanessa replied with a photograph of the bracelet. Daniel claimed he was discussing branding. Laughter broke out in the gallery before the judge demanded silence. The prosecutor moved to revenue. "Did you instruct finance to record unsigned contracts?" "I instructed them to reflect commercial reality." "Was the contract legally effective?" "It was commercially certain." "Was it signed? The signature was procedural?" "Did the customer have a right to walk away, technically?" "Then the revenue was not earned." In leadership, certainty often precedes paperwork. The prosecutor displayed the contract that later required major revisions. "Did you certify to the board that all material conditions were satisfied?" "Based on information available." "You had the document." "I relied on my team." "When your team objected?" "You removed them." "I reorganized for efficiency." "When Maya Ortiz filed a complaint?" "Vanessa deleted it." "I did not direct deletion." The recording played. "Clear the old complaints before transition." Daniel said he meant resolve them. The prosecutor played the next message already handled. "That is why you belong beside me." "Did you ask how they were resolved?" "I trusted Vanessa." "You trusted her enough to delete complaints, but not enough to accept responsibility for invoices." Daniel's temper appeared for the first time. "She deceived me." Vanessa sat behind the prosecution table and did not react. "Did Mrs. Notabermation spite as an else?" "Hayes deceive you about the trust?" "Yes." "How she hid that she controlled my company?" "Did you review the shareholder disclosures?" "The structure was intentionally obscure." "Did you ask who provided the rescue capital?" "It was not relevant to operations." "Yet, you took public credit for securing it." "I led the company." "Did you tell employees the rescue depended on your negotiation?" "I represented management." "Did Claire ever instruct you to say that?" "No." "Did she ask for public credit?" "No." "Did she interfere in your promotions?" "Not openly." The prosecutor paused. What does not openly mean? Daniel realized the implication. Her influence existed whether she admitted it or not. So when good things happened, you assumed her influence. When you committed fraud, you say she trapped you. Is there any outcome for which you are solely responsible? His attorney objected. The judge sustained. But the question remained in the room. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They found Daniel guilty on the principal fraud, conspiracy, falsification, obstruction, and related counts. He was acquitted on one narrow charge involving a vendor payment the government could not prove he personally authorized. Daniel focused on that acquittal as the verdicts were read, nodding as though it vindicated his entire defense. Then the clerk continued. Guilty. 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 His shoulders lowered one fraction at a time. Patricia cried behind him. I sat beside Lena and Arthur. My father reached for my hand but stopped before touching my injured wrist, though it had healed more than a year earlier. Some memories teach the body new caution. At sentencing, employees submitted statements describing lost bonuses, threatened careers, and fear created by the executive office. Maya wrote that being told she had no place in the new Meridian made her question whether integrity was a professional weakness. Two women whose complaints Vanessa buried described watching the ceremony and realizing the company had protected Daniel until his violence reached someone powerful. Their statement challenged me directly. We are grateful action was taken. But we ask why the system required the controlling shareholder's daughter to be harmed before everyone believed what leadership had already done to less powerful women. I read that sentence many times. It was fair. The audit began before the shove. But the public response accelerated because I had power and visibility. Employees without either had been dismissed. At sentencing, I included their criticism in my own statement. Daniel's conduct harmed me, I said. But the company's failure began earlier. When complaints from employees without family influence were redirected and erased, accountability must not depend on who a person's father is. The judge referenced that point. She described Daniel's scheme as an abuse of corporate authority, a calculated effort to convert future success into permission for present fraud, and a pattern of blaming subordinates for decisions he directed. She noted the assault but did not sentence him as if it were the central financial offense. Daniel addressed the court. I regret the pain caused by decisions made during an extraordinary leadership transition, he said. I never intended to steal. I intended to preserve Meridian's momentum and repay any disputed amounts through future performance. My marriage was under stress, and private conflict was weaponized against me. I accept that I should have exercised better judgment. But I ask the court not to destroy a life of achievement over accounting interpretations and personal mistakes. He still could not name a victim without turning the sentence toward himself. The judge asked whether he wanted to apologize to Maya, the women whose complaints were removed, shareholders, employees, or me. Daniel looked at his lawyer. I apologize to anyone who felt harmed. That is not an answer, the judge said. He remained silent. She sentenced him to 9 years in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, restitution, and a prohibition on serving as an officer or director of a public reporting company for 10 years after release. Civil judgments and arbitration awards required additional repayment. His unvested equity was canceled. The private lender seized his remaining investment property, Willis with an intation his remaining investment property. Patricia sold her second home to finance legal fees and later filed bankruptcy. She continued insisting my family had destroyed Daniel, perhaps believing that was easier than admitting she raised him to interpret every boundary as persecution. As deputies approached, Daniel turned toward me. Claire, he said. The judge told him to face forward. He did not ask for forgiveness. He said, "Tell them Meridian would be gone without me." I answered quietly, though I do not know whether he heard. Meridian is still here. That was the fact he could not survive emotionally. The company continued. Machines ran. Contracts were signed. Employees arrived on Monday. His absence did not create a hole shaped like a savior. It created space for other people to do their jobs without performing loyalty to one man. Naomi Brooks became permanent CEO after the board completed an external search. I supported her appointment, but did not control the process alone. The trust published its voting rationale and governance principles. Naomi rejected the ceremonial contract Daniel had designed. Her compensation depended on multi-year cash performance, safety, customer retention, and ethics metrics. Not only headline growth. She kept her office door open twice a week for employee appointments and required every complaint involving senior leadership to reach the independent board committee. Within 18 months, Meridian restored lender compliance and returned to sustainable profitability. We did not recover every customer. We closed one product line and eliminated several executive roles. Unlike Daniel, Naomi described the costs honestly. Employees did not celebrate every decision, but they knew the numbers matched the statements. That consistency became a form of stability. I remained executive chair for 6 months, instead of 90 days, because the investigation and refinancing required continuity. Then I stepped back into a non-executive trustee role. Some reporters expected me to become CEO and described my decision as surprising. They misunderstood the story as a battle for Daniel's chair. I had never wanted his title. I wanted the company governed well enough that no person could confuse a chair with ownership. Arthur retired fully from Bennett Global 2 years later and transferred additional trustee responsibilities to an independent committee. Our relationship changed. We stopped communicating through arguments about Daniel. We learned to disagree without disappearing for months. One evening, he admitted that allowing me to conceal the rescue had been a mistake. "I wanted you to see that I respected your marriage," he said. I wanted Daniel to see that I respected him. We both made respect too dependent on his comfort. Arthur nodded. "Your mother would have said that sooner." "She did." We laughed. Grief became gentler when it no longer had to compete with crisis. I sold the house Daniel, and I shared. Not because the property carried unbearable memories, but because it was designed around a life that no longer existed. The large executive kitchen, formal dining room, and glass office had been selected to impress clients. I purchased a smaller home near the lake with a room for books and a garden my mother would have liked. Every document was reviewed carefully, though there was no complicated trust structure. At closing, the title officer asked whether I wanted my legal name listed as Claire Bennett or Claire Hayes. I chose Bennett. Changing the name did not erase 12 years. It stopped requiring the future to announce them. I kept working as a restructuring advisor. For a while, clients assumed every engagement would end with a dramatic removal. Real restructuring is rarely dramatic. It involves supplier terms, cash forecasts, product decisions, and difficult conversations before a stage is built. I became more direct about leadership behavior. Financial distress and ethical distress often share a pattern. Warnings are reframed as disloyalty until the cost becomes visible to everyone. I told boards that charisma cannot substitute for controls and that no performance metric should reward the person able to suppress the most inconvenient information. Meridian's case became part of governance courses. Professors called it the Hayes capture because Daniel attempted to capture reporting channels before formal appointment. I disliked the name. It kept him central. In lectures, I referred to it as the Meridian governance failure. The failure involved a leader, but also directors who accepted premature celebration, executives who laughed, systems routed through one office, and a controlling trust that remained too invisible. Institutions create conditions. Individuals make choices inside them. Repair requires addressing both. Maya eventually became Meridian's chief accounting officer. Before accepting, she requested written authority to report directly to the audit committee and refused a compensation structure tied solely to quarterly earnings. The board approved. At her first annual meeting, she presented a slide showing adjustments and control weaknesses before presenting growth. An analyst asked whether leading with problems might damage confidence. Maya said, "Confidence built by hiding the first slide is not confidence." I watched remotely and felt more pride than I ever felt during Daniel's industry awards. 2 of the women whose complaints had been suppressed returned to Meridian after independent settlements. One chose not to return, but joined the advisory council that redesigned reporting channels. We paid them for their expertise. The company issued an apology that named the failure without requiring them to describe personal details publicly. No apology restores time. But accurate institutional language prevents harm from becoming rumor. Vanessa completed her sentence and later wrote to me through counsel. She said prison education programs had shown her how administrative power can become abuse precisely because it looks ordinary. Calendar changes, access restrictions, coded invoices, and altered performance files did not feel dramatic while she performed them. Together, They controlled who could speak and what leaders could see. She did not ask for forgiveness. She said she planned to work outside corporate administration after release and repay restitution. I did not respond. Growth does not require renewed access to everyone harmed. I hope she changed. I also kept the boundary. Patricia sent letters blaming me until Lena requested they stop. The final letter said Daniel had loved me more than I understood, and that ambitious men sometimes needed women to believe in them through mistakes. I wrote no reply. Belief is not the suspension of evidence. Support is not the transfer of consequences. Love that requires one person to remain on the floor so another can stay on stage is not love worth protecting. Daniel appealed his conviction and sentence. The appellate court upheld both. Years later, he participated in prison business courses and wrote an article about executive pressure. A magazine contacted me for comment because he described his case as a collapse of judgment within a politicized family enterprise. I declined. He was entitled to construct meaning from his life. He was not entitled to use my response as certification. Restitution payments arrived through seized accounts, asset sales, and prison earnings. Meridian recovered only part of the false vendor spending. Some money had become hotels, meals, and experiences that could not be returned. Insurance covered certain losses. The greater recovery came from systems that made repetition harder. Every quarter, without concealed complaints, returned something no ledger could name. Every employee who challenged a number without losing a job restored part of what Daniel damaged. Every board packet that separated proposed revenue from earned revenue corrected the language he abused. 5 years after the ceremony, Meridian held an anniversary event at the Milwaukee plant to mark a decade since the bankruptcy rescue. Naomi invited me to speak. I almost refused because celebrations around rescues can create the same mythology that protected Daniel. Then Robert, the maintenance supervisor, called. "Come tell it correctly," he said. The event was held on the factory floor, not in a ballroom. Employees stood beside the production line. No one called it my rescue. I explained that emergency capital, lender concession, supplier patience, employee work, and operational decisions all contributed. Daniel had played a role. So had hundreds of others. Companies are not saved by one person. I said, that story is attractive because it gives us someone to applaud. It is dangerous because it gives the same person permission to decide whose work and warnings disappear. Afterward, Robert showed me the old conveyor sensor Daniel had once helped repair. It had been replaced years earlier. But Robert kept the metal housing in a cabinet. He was good that day. Robert said, "Yes. Does that make the rest harder? It used to. And now it reminds me that one good day does not purchase immunity from later choices." Robert nodded. Neither does one bad day erase every good thing. No. But some bad days reveal a pattern we refuse to name. We left the old part in the cabinet. I did not need Daniel to have been evil from the beginning. I needed only to stop using his earlier goodness as an excuse for present harm. The phrase "know your place" followed me longer than Daniel did. Strangers quoted it in comments, headlines, and interviews. Some treated my response as a fantasy of hidden wealth. A cruel husband humiliates a quiet wife, then discovers she owns the room. That version was satisfying because it transformed injury into instant power. It was also incomplete. Most people harmed by a spouse do not control 62% of a company. They do not have a chairman for a father or investigators waiting outside a ballroom. I understood that privilege clearly. My power allowed evidence to move faster after Daniel shoved me. It did not make the shove less frightening, the affairs less painful, or the years of manipulation easier to recognize. More importantly, it created an obligation to ensure Meridian would respond when the next person reporting harm had no family connection at all. The sentence from the women whose complaints were buried remained framed in the audit committee room. Accountability must not depend on who a person's father is. I asked that it be placed there. Directors read it before every executive ethics review. The trust also funded an independent ombuds office available to hourly workers, contractors, and employees in every region. Reports bypassed management. Trends reached the board even when individual cases remained confidential. We published statistics on retaliation claims, investigation time, and outcomes. Some executives complained that transparency created reputational risk. Naomi answered, "The behavior creates risk. The report measures whether we are willing to see it." That was the leadership Meridian needed. At conferences, people asked how to uncover a partner's secret financial misconduct. They expected techniques: hidden folders, bank searches, private investigators. I explained that no one should illegally access devices or turn suspicion into surveillance without cause. My discovery began through documents I was authorized to review. The company's numbers contradicted its story. Once that happened, I involved professionals and preserved evidence. The lesson was not that every spouse should secretly investigate. The lesson was that intimacy does not require you to ignore contradictions in areas where you hold legitimate responsibility. Daniel repeatedly tried to collapse my roles. When I questioned Meridian as trustee, he called me a jealous wife. When I objected as a wife, he told me business was not my place. He changed the category, so no version of me possessed authority. Manipulative people often do that. At home, they say you are too emotional to discuss money. At work, they say personal knowledge makes you conflicted. When you remain quiet, they call it consent. When you speak, they call it disruption. The goal is not consistency. The goal is to leave you without a valid position from which to object. Naming each role clearly helped me recover. As wife, I could end the marriage. As trustee, I could vote. As witness, I could testify. As shareholder representative, I could demand controls. As a person, I could say he had no right to push me. No single accusation erased the others. My father and I later created governance training for families whose investments overlapped with marriages. The first principle was simple secrecy, intended to protect someone's pride, usually creates unpriced risk. Had Daniel known the trust rescued Meridian, he might have resented me sooner. He might also have made different choices. More likely, his reaction would have revealed the marriage's weakness before the company gave him greater authority. I had believed hidden support was generous. In reality, it denied both of us a truthful relationship. Daniel built confidence on an incomplete foundation, and I kept reinforcing it because admitting the truth became more difficult each year. His fraud was not my fault. My secrecy was still a decision worth examining. Responsibility for your own choices does not dilute another person's responsibility for theirs. It prevents betrayal from teaching only fear. I stopped asking whether I should have known earlier and began asking what I would do differently when discomfort appeared again. I would not apologize for an independent advisor. I would not accept jokes that diminished my work as harmless. I would not reinterpret smashed objects as stress. I would not allow someone's embarrassment about help to become a permanent rule of silence. I would not protect a company's reputation by making employees carry its secrets alone. Those lessons mattered more than imagining a version of the past where I never loved Daniel. I did love him. I loved the young manager on the factory floor, the man who brought coffee, the husband who stayed awake beside me when my mother died, and the executive who sometimes still asked thoughtful questions before applause became his preferred answer. Love was real because I experienced it honestly. His later choices were real too. Accepting both allowed me to grieve without returning. Several years after the trial, I began seeing someone named Thomas Reed, a physician who directed a community rehabilitation clinic. We met through a foundation project. Though he had no interest in Meridian and little patience for executive events, on our fourth date, he asked, why my phone vibrated whenever company alerts arrived. I explained the trust and board responsibilities. He listened without turning the information into a question about access. Months later, when we discussed living arrangements, he proposed separate financial counsel before combining any expenses. I do not want either of us agreeing to something because saying no feels unromantic. He said. The sentence was more intimate than any promise Daniel made on stage. We moved slowly. I did not ask Thomas to prove he was different. I watched whether his behavior remained consistent when boundaries inconvenienced him. It did. We eventually married in my garden with 40 guests. Arthur walked beside me but did not give me away. You were never mine to transfer, he said. Maya attended. Naomi attended. Robert sent the old censor housing as a joke. Then called to make sure I understood he wanted it. Returned to the cabinet. There were no live cameras and no corporate announcement. Thomas knew exactly what the Bennett Trust owned and exactly what he did not. Our agreement protected his clinic interests, my assets, and our separate professional responsibilities. He thanked the lawyers for clarity. Nothing about that felt cold. Clear consent made generosity safer. I did not become less trusting after Daniel. I became more accurate about what trust means. Trust is not refusing to verify. It is confidence that verification will not be punished. It is the freedom to ask a question without being accused of disloyalty. It is knowing that another person's authority has limits they respect, even when no one is watching. Daniel wanted trust to mean unrestricted belief in his explanations. Thomas understood it as consistency between words, records, and actions. One requires blindness. The other can survive light. Arthur died peacefully at 81. 7 years after the ceremony, in his final months, he remained sharp enough to argue about investment committees and weak enough to admit when he was tired. One afternoon, we watched a recording of the Milwaukee anniversary event. He paused after my statement that companies are not saved by one person. You were talking about me too, he said. Partly. Good. He had built Bennett Global around his instincts and spent years learning to make it survive without him. I thought control meant never being surprised. He told me. Then, Daniel surprised all of us. Control means responding accurately after surprise. I said. He smiled. That sounds like your mother. After his death, I became chair of the Bennett Trust Council. But the structure no longer allowed one family member to exercise unrestricted power. Independent trustees, employee impact reviews, and conflict rules limited me as deliberately as they limited everyone else. Daniel's story had demonstrated why even well-intentioned control required boundaries. I could not demand accountability from executives while treating my ownership as personal sovereignty. 62% made my vote decisive that night. It did not make every future opinion correct. The strongest systems protect institutions from good people becoming overconfident. Not only from obvious villains, Meridian eventually listed a minority portion of its shares publicly. The offering documents included a detailed history of the governance remediation. Bankers suggested reducing references to the scandal. Naomi refused. Investors should know which controls were built from experience, she said. The offering succeeded. Employees received a meaningful equity pool. Maya rang the opening bell, with a group of plant workers and engineers. I watched from home. No single executive stood at the center. Daniel once believed the company's value depended on his face appearing beside its name. Its strongest public moment came when dozens of people shared the stage. Restitution continued during his imprisonment. Each annual report included recovered amounts, but did not name him after legal requirements ended. He became less central to the company's story. That was a deeper consequence than public disgrace. The organization he tried to embody learned to function without using him as a reference point. Even criticism no longer required his name. A new generation of employees joined Meridian, knowing the governance case only through training materials. They saw anonymized examples of related party vendors, premature revenue, captured reporting channels, and leadership retaliation. Some did not know the acting CEO in the case had been my husband until older employees told them, "I preferred that." Lessons become institutional when they no longer depend on fascination with the person who caused them. Daniel was released after serving most of his sentence with credit for good conduct. He moved to another state and worked as an operations consultant for small manufacturers under restrictions that prevented him from controlling client funds. A journalist contacted me after locating him. Daniel had said he regretted allowing personal relationships to interfere with an otherwise successful career. He still described the problem as interference rather than conduct. The journalist asked whether I believed he had changed. "I have no current basis to assess him," I said. "His future choices belong to him." That was all. I did not monitor him. I did not ask former contacts for updates. Freedom arrived when his improvement or failure stopped functioning as evidence about my decisions. Years earlier, I imagined closure would require an apology accurately naming everything. It did not. Closure came through distance, systems repaired, and a life no longer organized around whether Daniel understood the harm. On the 10th anniversary of the ceremony, Meridian's communications team found the original live stream in the archive and asked whether it should remain restricted. Legally, the company could preserve it under litigation records without allowing internal access. I watched it once with Naomi and Susan. The footage began with a documentary, applause, Vanessa's kiss, and my walk toward the stage. I saw myself fall. Even after a decade, my body tightened. Then I watched the moment I stood and sent the message. Online viewers often called that the instant I revealed power. Watching again, I saw something quieter. I had not yet known whether the board, cameras, or legal process would protect me. I only knew I would not leave the room carrying Daniel's version of what happened. That was the beginning. Not the trust. Not my father. The decision to remain attached to my own perception. "Do you want the training department to use part of it?" Naomi asked. "No," I said. "Employees do not need to watch violence to learn governance." We retained the file under restricted legal preservation and removed promotional copies. Daniel created the live stream to make his appointment permanent. In the end, even the image of his fall did not deserve permanent circulation. Accountability does not require endless spectacle. The lessons had moved into policy, leadership, and memory. The footage could become quiet. I kept one object from that night: the voting pen. It was an ordinary black pen provided by board counsel. I used it to sign the 5 resolutions while Daniel begged me to stop. For years, it remained in a drawer. Eventually, I placed it inside a small display at the Bennett Governance Center beside the original Meridian Rescue Agreement. The plaque did not mention my marriage. It read, "Capital creates authority. Governance creates responsibility." The rescue agreement showed how the trust gained power. The pen showed how power had to be used when leadership violated responsibility. Students often assumed the dramatic object was the more important one. I told them the rescue contract mattered more. Preventing collapse quietly is usually harder than removing a failed leader publicly. Daniel believed the stage was the center because the stage contained applause. Most consequential work happened in conference rooms before and after it. If you are hearing my story while someone repeatedly tells you to know your place, ask, who benefits from the place they assigned? Does it prevent you from reviewing money? Speaking to advisors? Reporting misconduct? Or naming harm? Does your role change every time you raise a question? Are you only a spouse when business is discussed but financially responsible? When debt appears, are you too emotional? When you object but expected to provide comfort after they hurt you? Are you excluded from decisions and then blamed for outcomes? A place defined by another person's convenience is not a boundary, it is containment. Real roles include rights, responsibilities, and the ability to verify what is being done in your name. I also want you to remember that calm action does not require hidden wealth. My text message reached a chairman because of my circumstances. Another person's message may reach a friend, lawyer, hotline, accountant, counselor, union representative, or family member. Power begins by making the event legible outside the person controlling its meaning. Document what happened. Preserve lawful evidence. Seek independent help. Do not announce every step to someone likely to destroy records or escalate violence. Safety matters more than dramatic confrontation. The most important part of my response was not that my father took the stage. It was that Daniel no longer controlled the only channel through which the story could be told. He told me I was just his wife. I contacted someone who knew I was also a trustee. He called the shove private, RA2. The live stream showed it was public. He called the fraud strategy. The records showed theft. He called employee warnings disloyalty. The audit showed accuracy. Every abusive system survives by keeping each fact inside the label chosen by the person benefiting. Independent eyes restore names. Years after the event, people still ask whether I regret hiding the trust from Daniel. I regret the secrecy. I do not regret saving Meridian. Those answers can coexist. The investment protected thousands of jobs and gave the company time to become healthier. My silence protected Daniel's pride and delayed a truth our marriage needed. One decision served purpose. The other served fear. Maturity is learning to separate them without rewriting yourself as either hero or fool. I was a competent woman who made an emotionally costly choice. I was a loving wife who ignored warnings. I was a powerful trustee who allowed reporting systems to remain vulnerable. I was also the person who acted when the evidence became clear. No single sentence must erase the others. Daniel spent years building a story where he rose alone. He removed investors, employees, advisors, and me from the narrative until his image occupied every frame. At the ceremony, he tried to remove me physically from the stage. The truth returned everyone he had erased. The trust, the board, Maya, Susan, the women whose complaints disappeared, the employees who kept Meridian alive, even Vanessa. Once she stopped protecting him, became evidence that his power depended on other people carrying risk. He did not fall because my father was stronger. He fell because the structure he claimed as personal achievement was built from contributions, obligations, and records he refused to respect. That is why the final lesson was not that I owned the company. I did not own it personally. And ownership alone would not make my decision just. The lesson was that authority exists within relationships larger than ego. A chief executive answers to a board answers to shareholders and law. A trustee answers to purpose. A spouse answers to consent. A company answers to employees, customers, and truth in its records. Daniel wanted every relationship to move in one direction, toward him. Once those obligations began moving back, his title disappeared. My husband told me to know my place while I was lying on the floor. That night, he finally discovered his. That became the lesson I carried into every boardroom afterward. A company rarely collapses because of one dramatic act. It weakens when small exceptions are treated as loyalty. When a complaint is redirected to the person being accused. When a number is adjusted because the truth feels inconvenient. And when silence is rewarded more than courage. Daniel did not destroy Meridian in a single night. He only revealed, in public, what the company had allowed in private for too long. So when I taught this case, I refused to turn it into a story about a powerful wife taking revenge on an arrogant husband. That would have been too easy. And too dishonest. The real lesson was harder. Control is not leadership. Fear is not discipline. And performance is not success if it depends on hiding the cost. A healthy institution must protect the person who speaks early. Not only applaud the person who exposes the damage after everyone can see it. If there is one rule I now trust more than any title, it is this: never let results become an excuse to ignore the way they were produced. Profit without integrity is borrowed failure. Authority without accountability is only danger wearing a suit. And loyalty that requires people to lie is not loyalty at all. It is the first invoice fraud sends before the bill comes due. Scriptwriter Nguyen Van Chien.